Well, I think we can get started now. I think we've got a critical mass in the room. I don't know if there's any seats left, to be honest. Thank you so much for coming to what promises to be a very interesting conversation and a slightly different kind of event for the Tower Center. My name is Josh Rovner. I'm the interim director of the Tower Center for Political Studies here at SMU. I teach political science. I teach about issues of national security, international politics, and war and peace, that sort of thing. And most of what we do at the Tower Center is on issues political. Right? We talk about Congress, and we talk about international relations, and we talk about trade, and so forth. We decided to stretch out a little bit for this event. We decided to see if we could make common cause with our friends at the Meadows Museum, because it turns out that a lot of the issues that animate their discussions are the same issues that animate our discussions. Right? And the relationship between art and politics is becoming more and more newsworthy. So we thought now was the time to put our collective heads together and see what we could do to engage the public in a conversation about this relationship. Now, I also have selfish reasons for doing this event because this is one of my favorite rooms in the whole world. I mean, can you imagine? This is such a fabulous place to do a conversation. I love it. I would just hang out in here even if we didn't have an event. So I had that selfish reason in mind. And thank you to the Meadows Museum for making this room available and for making this event possible. It's been a real pleasure working with Meadows and with Marl Roglán. We started talking about an event on art and politics many months ago. In the spring, we had this nascent idea about a conversation bringing together political scientists, art historians, museum directors, government officials, or some combination of the above to talk about the intersection of the art world and the political world. And we had this idea about why people destroy art. This is something that we see again and again. Why would somebody destroy something beautiful? Is this just because of evil? Is this just because of frustration? Or is there some deeper political motive at stake here? Well, as a political scientist and as somebody who studies international politics, I'm interested in issues of power. That is, how do people use art as an expression of power, and why do they destroy art? Is that also an expression of political power? We talked about this in the spring, about organizing the event. Over the summer, as you well know, the issue took on dismal importance after the events in Syria, and especially the destruction of the temple at Palmyra. Suddenly, our idea about an interesting conversation became very real, something that really needed to be discussed. After ISIS destroyed the temple at Palmyra, a lot of the commentary I listened to was that, well, this is just a ruthless, horrible organization, and the people that are doing these terrible things to these antiquities are just evil, rotten folks. Now, there's undoubtedly truth to that, but it's also worth asking if there's something deeper going on. Because, as you will hear tonight, there is a long history of groups destroying art for various reasons. Some having to do with the politics of the time. What were those purposes? Do the examples from the past shed on any light on what's happening today? Are there lessons from the history of this kind of destruction that we could use to understand both the events in the Middle East today and perhaps to think about ways and things that we could do to stop it? Joining us to address these questions tonight are two real experts in the field and two people with vast experience in art and politics. Marl Roglán is the director of the Meadows Museum. He is an authority on Spanish art, art history, and community art engagement. He also is responsible for running this fabulous museum, which is a real treasure, not only for SMU, but for the entire DFW community. If you're new to Meadows, if you're one of our friends that comes to a lot of Tower Center events, you should start coming to the Meadows Museum as well. It's a real treasure, and you can thank him for all that he's done to keep it going. On Mark's right is our other speaker tonight, Anita Difanis. She's Director of Government Affairs at the Association of Art Museum Directors, where she has worked since 1992. Put another way, Ms. Difanis has been at the intersection of art and politics for over 2 decades. She has lived right at that point where these two worlds come together, so nobody is, I think, better placed to discuss this issue than she is. The way we will organize the discussion tonight, our speakers will each have the floor for 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll open it up to a conversation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of great questions, and we'll try to save plenty of time to get everybody's voice into the conversation. So with that, thank you again for coming, and I will turn the floor over first to Mark Roglán.
I'll try to. Can you hear me? Yeah. So thank you, Joshua, for doing this. Thank you to Jim too, and to Lisa for organizing this this discussion, in which we'll be seeing so much about art and power. And what I wanted to do for today's conversation is start with this book, and I wanted to start this book because it was a book that was very important to me. It's a book that was published in 1985, and the title of the book is How New York Stole the Idea of Modern Art. And the reason it was important to me is because I was doing my PhD then, in the late 80s and early 90s, and then it's when I came to Tufts University, and I was studying there, and basically I was given this book, and I read it from cover to back immediately. And it was really interesting because when you're trained as an art historian, you learn about Titian, you learn about Rembrandt, you learn about Velázquez or about Goya, but usually you think art just the kind of parameters, art and art history parameters. And this was a very interesting book to me because it was written by a historian, and basically, just the long story short, is that he was trying to explain why the Center for the Arts moved from Paris to New York in the 1940s. And he based all of this movement in historical facts, and diplomatic facts, propaganda, financial issues, sociology, diplomacy. So basically, that it was part of almost like the Cold War played a huge role in how this shift took place, and even how abstract expressionism, this incredible, very important movement in American art, was lifted because of all these issues. I, for the first time, was gathering all of these issues about financial issues and diplomacy and things like that. And at the end, when you read the book, there's a lot of truth in that. But I still, as an art historian, I still gravitated enormously towards the art and the art history. So I still think that even the Pope was critical to understand his monies and his influence to have Michelangelo do the Sistine Chapel. I still give a lot of credit to Michelangelo for being so creative to do the Sistine Chapel. And that's something if I had to do a critic of the book, would say that was lacking in this book. It was so much historical and politically and sociologically and financially and economically focused that it could have done much more just to give some credit to the artists themselves. No? But what I wanted to just throw out there is because I do believe that arts and politics do intertwine. I do believe that economy and sociology and diplomacy intertwine, and it's good to see everything as a whole. So I'm a person that likes to see that perspective. And I'm going to focus in my conversation on the exhibition that's going on upstairs. The exhibition on the Alba collection, which opened just a few weeks ago here at the Meadows, because I think the Alba and the Alba family really reflect a lot of the issues that we see today going on, and also they do reflect a lot the whole issues of arts and politics. And I wanted to start showing some paintings that are in the second floor of the museum. In which we can see, for example, how art and politics intertwine. This is a portrait of the Duke of Alba, the third Duke of Alba. He was the most important general of Charles V and Philip II of Spain during the 16th century. And he is being portrayed here not as a common person, but is being portrayed by Anthony Moore, which was one of the most important painters of his time, dressed with whole armor, and it's not just an armor. I mean, you can see it's fully decorated with gilded decorations, as well as he has this important condecoration of the golden fleece, which is the most important condecoration you could get from the king himself of Spain. Only 30 plus people were able to wear that golden fleece, so he's portrayed with that, as well as with the sash of captain and the baton of command. So he's also presented himself as a general, he's presented as a person with... So basically art is trying to reflect politics, it's trying to reflect the stature and the importance of this individual. The same thing happens with this other portrait of the same person, the third Duke of Alba, which the original of this painting was asked to be done by the third Duke of Alba to Titian. So Titian did the original painting, and basically it was destroyed, it was lost. And Titian was the painter that did the portraits of Charles V of Spain, I mean the Holy Roman Emperor. So for the Duke of Alba to have the painter of the emperor do the painting, again, it was a way to show status, but also power. And the family asked, before the original was destroyed, they asked Rubens to do a copy of the original. So here in the exhibition we have the Rubens, which is also a major artist from the 17th century, creating the copy. Also, we have portraits upstairs of other members of the family. This is the Berwick family. On my right, we have the portrait of James II of England, with some of the most beautiful little shoes that you can imagine. Again, showing us also his statue. No, not everybody could wear and pull off the shoes. And then we have the second Duke of Berwick, done also by a French artist, Van Loo, in the 18th century. And here the second Duke of Berwick is not only with the golden fleece, this important condecoration from the King of Spain, but also his whole robe has the golden fleece embroidered in the robe. So he's just trying to show how he's projecting an image of power. And also here we have this kind of very beautiful painting by Winterhalter in the 19th century, this romantic view of the Empress of France, which was also connected to the Alba family. But of course, he's wearing the crown. He has this fur, that is a royal fur, and also he has this beautiful chair that has the coat of arms of the Alba family, and here the coat of arms of Emperor Napoleon III of France and the Montijo family, which is where she came from. So all of these are symbols of power just through paintings. And of course, if you have the greatest artists of your times doing your paintings and you're projecting all the power through art, you need to also have something to embellish your palaces. So, for example, we have in the exhibition this Pennemaker tapestry that is gigantic. It's like this wall of big, and it's made with silk, and it's made with silver, and it's made with gold. So it's again another projection of power and wealth. One of the most important portraits in the exhibition that I think brings power and art together is this portrait that was done by Sorolla, a very important early 20th century Spanish artist. We did a major exhibition on Sorolla just a couple of years ago, that represents the 17th Duke of Alba. He posed very elegantly in this room. And what is important is that this is not just one more room of one of his numerous palaces. This is this room, which is the room devoted again to that very important general in the 16th century, the third Duke of Alba. And we can see that portrait of this is the same frame that can be seen here. And also the portrait of Charles V of Spain, the emperor, that bust us here. And then also he's posing with the Battle of Mulberg, these tapestries were this battle between Protestants and Catholics that the Duke of Alba won in the 16th century. So he's trying to project himself as a person that was part of that legacy. He came from the glory days of the Spanish Empire when the sun could not set in his territories, and he wanted to make sure that when we see this in the 20th century, he's still connected to that glory of the Spanish Empire in the 16th century. And of course, if you do have tapestries and you have paintings and you need the right setting for that. And the Albas do have quite remarkable settings. They have three major palaces, one in Salamanca, one in Seville, and this one in Madrid, which is done by Ventura Rodriguez, a very important architect from the 18th century, and basically has like 48 bathrooms. And it has all the carriages, and it's just gorgeous. And if you do have the building, hey, you need the gardens. And the palace is completely surrounded by gardens. I mean, all around, this is what you will see from the back when you come out of the dining room. And these are the back gardens with the city of Madrid basically surrounding, your palace. So you see here the Palace of Lydia, and all of those are the green grounds. This is the pet cemetery, this is here. A pet cemetery that mounts all the way to the 18th century. So each of the pets, even the parents, have their tombstone. And all of that, again, is art reflecting the power of this family, which is, after the King of Spain, the most powerful family in Spain. And this is the palace, how it looked in the 1920s. This photograph was taken just before the Civil War started in Spain. And this is how it looked in 1936, when in November there were 3 bombs that fell from an airplane, and they were incendiary bombs, and in 2 days there was a fire started in the ceiling, and during 2 days the whole palace was destroyed. The Franco troops said that it had been the communists. The communist troops said that it had been the Franco troops. It seems that it was the aviation of Franco that dropped the bombs and created this horrible scene. And basically, it was completely destroyed, the palace, the Lydia Palace in Madrid. And this is a photograph from the early 40s. And which you can see from the air what Madrid looked like after the Civil War. And you can see all those buildings without, only the facades are remaining. You can see all the debris from the bombs. And this is Lydia. This is the palace of the Duke of Alba. And you can only see the 4 walls. All that was inside was destroyed, including the library with thousands of volumes and over 7,000 prints. Lost forever. But one thing that happened was that just before the war started, I mean, when the moments of, there was a brigade that was formed from the Republican side, the communist side, which was this brigade that it was like the Monuments Men. I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it was like the Monuments Men / Spanish version. And these were the men of that brigade, the communists, and they got into the palace, and most of the art was seized. And it was taken to a number of safe havens. So part of the collection was the Duke of Alba, before fleeing the country. He had to flee. His brother didn't flee, for example, and he was shot. The part of the collection was sent to the British Embassy. Another part of the collection was sent to the Prado Museum, and another part of the collection was sent to the Bank of Spain, to the vaults. And here we see some of the paintings that are upstairs in the collection, in the exhibition, how this Federico Madrazo was here, or this Furini, this Florentine painting is there. And they were taken in trucks all the way to the Prado. This is the Prado Museum in the back. And when the government thought that if the Madrid was about to fall, they decided to send all the collections from the Prado Museum, all the collections from all this outside of Madrid, because they had fear that the bombs were going to hit the Prado and other institutions, and they were sent to Valencia. And so imagine all these hundreds and thousands of works of art leaving and fleeing Madrid. And so on one hand, you have all this devastation going around you, and on the other hand, we also take care of the art itself, no? And it was placed in this seminary from the 16th century, beautiful building in Valencia, very important collection as well. It's called Colegio del Patriarca. And for the first time ever, the Ministry of Culture, the Institución Pública de Fine Arts, decided to present the exhibition to the general public. And here we see like how it's said basically that this is exhibition of fine arts from the Palacio de Lidia, the Alba Palace, which was saved from the brutality of the fascists by the Communist Party, will be presented and everybody will be able to enjoy it. And it's also another of those words that we saw at the beginning, propaganda, no? Advertisement. Here, hey, the communists are saying, we save this art, and they are taking credit for that. And here we see some of the works of art presented in the cloister. Here's one of the Goyas that's upstairs, the Marquesa de Lazán, and the Goya in white in the cloister as well. And tapestries, no? Hanging from the ceiling as well as the... And I think it's very important to underline this whole issue of how politics and how like propaganda is used vastly with art itself, and to try to project yourself as I'm the protector of culture. It has value, you know? And here we see the same in this newspaper saying, well, this is the heroism, you know, that our troops were. We know that nobody jumped in the fire and tried to save a single painting. Because the fire lasted several days and it was completely done, nobody went inside. But here's trying to project the image that people were just jumping through the flames and just trying to save this for everybody to enjoy it. No? And here we see, this is a very, I think, interesting image of this miliciano, this militia, communist soldier looking at this Segers painting, which is also now upstairs in the collection. No? And this is the last painting I was bringing related to this chapter of the Alba family related to war. And it's all these seamstresses trying to repair tapestries while they were in Valencia. Eventually the collection then went to Barcelona when Valencia fell to the Franco troops, and from there went to Geneva. It was the first time that you could see Las Meninas on the Prado. It's only been shown once outside of Spain, and that was in Geneva in 1939. Then eventually all the art will be replicated in Spain. It's very interesting because here we see one of those issues where war and art come together and the consequences of that being, no? The other, another aspect of war and politics is when you also put into the whole mixed religion. And that happened in the 16th century with the Albas, with the third Duke of Alba, no? He represented the hardcore of Charles V and Philip II. So he was sent to the Low Countries to really protect the interests of Spain there, but also he came in with a hard fist. And he was going to, stop the rebellion and do it in a very kind of powerful way. And he did. I mean, he was brutal, and I think that is still in Holland. Instead of saying the boogeyman is coming to the children, they say the third Duke of Alba is coming. So I think that shows a little, reflects that kind of brutality. And he was like really like that kind of hard policy from Philip II. And here we have a wonderful sculpture done in Flanders in this period in which you see the third Duke of Alba and his enemies, which is the Elector of Saxony, Elizabeth I of England, and the Pope. So a very friendly guy. And he was, but it was so interesting. Also, he was a very high intellectual, and one of the things, and he loved art, and one of the things he did was to have one of the most important sculptors of the time do an important image of him, and that was Jonkin. Jonkin was one of the greatest sculptors. He was from Flanders, and he was one of the key sculptors of the time. Here's two sculptures of the Duke of Alba that Jonkin did. This is a medal that was done in silver of him, as well as this beautiful bronze, which is both pieces are in the Frick collection in New York. And they're like single cast. I mean, they were so beautifully executed. But he would feel like so powerful, and also he wanted to project this kind of power when he was in Flanders and in the Low Countries, that he decided to ask Jonkin to do one of the most important sculptures of his time. And that was a full-length sculpture in bronze of himself as protector of the interests of Spain and fighting against the tyranny. And that sculpture was made with cannons that he got from a battle with the Dutch. They were bronze cannons. So he brought the cannons after the victory of, against the Dutch, and he melted the cannons. And with the bronze that was melted, he created this sculpture. It was 6 feet high, and here it was depicted tyranny, which was like 2 heads with 6 arms. And furthermore, he decided to place the sculpture in the middle of the citadel of Antwerp, just for everybody to be able to see and witness what happened to whoever opposed him. No? So it was art of the highest level was being used to project politics. The sculpture, even Spanish writers thought it was like so pretentious and so arrogant for him to do a sculpture of this size that it was criticized. But always it was said that Adjunct created a masterpiece, one of the greatest works of art he ever did. Well, guess what? Philip II became upset that he was becoming too powerful in the north, and some notices came to him saying that he may want to do things on his own way, and also this kind of more oppressive way of doing politics was not paying good dividends for the Spanish cause. So he was brought in to Madrid, and he was replaced by a more lenient governor of Spain. The first thing this new, more lenient governor of Spain did is take the sculpture down, melt it down, and show and try to reflect how things change had come in a more, understandable, amicable way of understanding politics between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Europe had arrived, and Philip II had approved all of this. So here we go. From an art historical perspective, what a pity, no? What a victim of politics art became. We only know how the sculpture looked because there was an engraving done of the picture, and because also this drawing still exists in the Alva family holdings. A good positive story on the other side is the Alva Bible, the first Bible to be translated from Hebrew to Spanish in 1430. Which is also part of the exhibition. That was it was done by a rabbi in the 15th century, in a time where religions were able to coexist in Spain. Muslims, Christians, Jewish, working in Toledo, created this incredible book that was seized in the late 1400s by the Inquisition. And as you know, many books were destroyed. Everything that was in Hebrew and everything that was in Greek even was seized or destroyed by the Inquisition. So this book was preserved by the Inquisition. They didn't destroy it. And then it was given in the early 1600s to El Conde Duque de Difanis, which was a member of the Alva family, because he loved books. So it was a way, he was the prime minister of Philip IV. So it was a way to get this very powerful person something that he liked. And he kept it, and it's still in the family. It's one of the 30 earliest translations from Hebrew to any Romance language that exists in the world. So this is, I would say, a positive outcome of a story that also had many samples that were not so good. And here we have one of the sheets that was done with Moses with the Ten Commandments. So, moving forward, fast forward a little bit, unfortunately we can still see that today things may have not changed too much. When we saw that Alba Palace completely destroyed, and things like Aleppo, this very important palace, this is how it looked before and how it looks now. This were a very important neighborhood where there were mosques, and there were very important also buildings which is completely been leveled today. So that kind of destruction we saw in Madrid and the Alva family was affected is still pretty much there. I also brought this video, which probably you already have seen. Sorry.
That they're also destroying tomes of biblical history. Is it like a cultural cleansing going on in Mosul right now?
Yes, what you see in this video that was posted this afternoon on YouTube is men toppling statue after statue in Mosul's museum. And then we see one man with a drill defacing one of the famous winged bulls of Nineveh that dates back to 900 BC. And there's a man who briefly explains on this 5-minute video why they're doing it. He says that God has ordered us to destroy these idols, statues, and artifacts, and even if they are worth billions of dollars, we must do it. And of course, even these artifacts, it's not a question of monetary value. These are just incredibly unique artifacts that document the history of human civilization. Now, we also understand from a source we spoke to this afternoon in Mosul that what you're seeing in that video, of course, are things being destroyed, but many of the artifacts in the museum have been already sold on the black market for antiquities. And keep in mind that after the upheaval in Libya, in Egypt, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, the market for black market antiquities has been flooded because basically government order has broken down in all of these countries, and it's a free-for-all, whether it's ISIS or ordinary people desperate to make a living. But as I said, the market is now being flooded with these incredibly precious artifacts.
Absolutely. We're also hearing it's maps, it's books, it's manuscripts from the Mosul Library as well. So, I mean, like you say, the origins of civilization kept in some of these places, just destroyed forever.
Well, let me see if I can. Oops. I'm not an Apple person. So we saw that now happening again, and my question then would be, things have not changed, and basically is, what can we do? So when you think about it, pretty much things have not changed. So I tried to think about what can we do. And I came up with two kind of ideas. One, I think that basically we can have reactive measures, and basically a good example of that is what is now going on with the government, and we're trying to create a safe havens in U.S. museums to temporarily save Assyrian antiquities. And Anita was giving me an update now that, it went through the Congress, I think, on June 2nd, and it was going to go to the Senate, and it was going to go then to be signed by the President. But basically what we're trying to do is to try to, as museums, create a safe havens and try to become, in the States and also elsewhere, like places where. But what happens is that I think I think it's great, but it's taking so long that I don't know what will be left, and if it continues like that. So I love reactive measures because I think we have to react to what is happening, but I think I'm totally much more for preemptive measures. And one of the issues, for example, that I think is a really great success when it comes to preemptive measures, when it comes to the destruction of works of art, was what happened in 1970 with the UNESCO, when there was this convention that basically what it tried to do is to prevent people commercializing antiquities in the market. And then AMD also from 2014 and 2013 has been very actively involved with that. And at least what you do is say, well, what you see here, this is Iraq. In these little gopher holes, those are thieves. Those are like looters going into an archaeological site and just going in and trying to find whatever they can. This is not an archaeological site. This is pure destruction of patrimony. And at least those people know that they will not be able to sell those works of art to an American museum. I think that preempts has a little kind of sense, a message of not being able to do that. This is the Temple of Baal in Palmyra just blowing up, and there's some things that. One of the things I've been thinking is like, and I don't know if it exists, is to create maybe like a Monuments Men kind of brigade, you know, from UNESCO or maybe from the UN, something like blue helmets, no, that go in before things happen and try to bring out all this patrimony that is in Syria, but in some ways it's own for to all of us, no? I mean, when we see all those great 8th century, 9th century BC incredible works of art just being destroyed, I think it affects us as humans, because these were works of art that were created by us, by humans, and that belong to all of us. And I don't know. I mean, that will be like it's really hard to find an answer to something that has going on for so long. We saw it with the Alba collection itself, and it's still going on today. But I think my little grain of salt would be to start thinking more and kind of preemptive measures, more than try just to base things and more reactive measures. Thank you.
Leave it to the
experts. You know how to do it.
It's already here. Yes.
That was simple.
Thank you all for having me here tonight. I'm delighted to be here, back to the Meadows Museum. The Association of Art Museum Directors represents about 220 art museums in the U.S. and then a scattering in Canada and Mexico. And I have to tell you, this museum is one of the most beautiful, and I've seen a lot of them, and you were very lucky. So delighted to come back, and thank you to the Tower Center for the invitation. I'm going to be talking about the 20th and 21st century. Mark gave us a terrific background. And I have always said that the work I do in Washington, you only love it if you have a screw loose. And I really do love it. One of the things I generally talk about, though, are art museums. I seldom talk about art. Full disclosure, I'm not an art historian. I have no background in art whatsoever. But I am going to be showing you some pictures, and we're going to talk about the government intervention with those works of art, not about the works of art per se. We've already talked about how one civilization has destroyed another, and this has been going on for centuries. It's not new. I'm going to use 4 examples. One, the most devastating example from the 20th century, of course, is the Holocaust. I'm going to take a couple of examples from U.S. Exhibitions where the U.S. government tried to interfere. That was not destruction, that was censorship. It's not like destruction, of course, but if you're being censored, it's a pretty serious matter. Then we'll move on to the Middle East and not spend too much time on that because you have all seen the news, but talking a little bit about Palmyra. And then the last one is an exhibition that I read about just recently that took place in Moscow about 5 weeks ago that I think is a precursor for some of what we're seeing, which is very disturbing, but we can talk more about that. I think we can, I'm going to see if I can manage notes in this computer. Oh, good. I think we can start with the premise that most art is not offensive. This is a Giovanni Bellini painting from the 14th century. It's the Madonna and Christ child. It celebrates the birth of Christ, of course. And it may engender all kinds of sentiments, but not probably, you're probably not going to be offended by it. I'm going to show you one other that is also, I think, totally inoffensive. The Bellini, by the way, is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This one is by Auguste Renoir, a 19th century French painter, and you probably know his work. It's called Luncheon of the Boating Party. It's at the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. Also not offensive. It's a celebration of young people. I don't know if they're on a boat or on the side of the Seine, but in any case, they don't. These paintings don't offend. We're going to look then at some works that are not terribly different than than particularly the Madonna, often grounded in religion, that groups and individuals found very offensive, and we will talk about that. We're going to start with, as I said, with the Nazis. And in the mid-30s or early 30s, when the Nazis took over Germany, there were several aspects to that takeover. A couple of them were, of course, the economic situation in Germany at the time, and then the industrial ambitions of the Germans, and then the Germans' intention or the Nazis' intention to create a superior race. For better or worse, the Jewish community embraced many of those, or was the manifestation of many of those. The Jewish community in Europe at that time were the industrialists. They were the bankers. They were often the intellectual powerhouses of those communities. And that did not sit well with the German, the Nazi regime. The Nazis, when they came to power, had the intention to, first of all, to eliminate all Jews any place in Europe. And I'm not telling you things you don't know. You know these things. And then in addition, to eliminate all Jewish culture any place it's particularly in Europe. We're talking about Europe. And when you're going to eliminate a culture, you start with religion and you start with art. And they did that. The Jewish community, in addition to representing often the industrialists and the bankers, often set the standard of sophistication. So in Europe, the Jewish community often was looked upon as sort of the gold standard of what sophisticated people did with their lives. When the Nazis forced people out of their homes in the countries that the Nazis invaded, they took their possessions. The possessions were abandoned and they became German property or they became Nazi property. The Germans were meticulous in their record keeping. And this is an irony that has come back to help. Oftentimes, as people were being sent out of the country they were fleeing or they were going to concentration camps, they were given receipts for the possessions they were leaving behind. And those receipts and those records have, in many instances, helped modern researchers restore some of these works and some of these collections back to the people from whom they came. Hitler was a frustrated artist. He twice applied to art school in Vienna and was refused. And I don't know if the world had been different had he been accepted in Vienna, but he wasn't. The fact is that he then had some very, very strict criteria for what good art was. He was the arbitrator of good art, if you will. It was heroic. It was romantic. It were old masters. It was Christian. And anything that didn't fit that was degenerate. So what we would call modern art today was degenerate art. And there was a lot of that going on at that time. And so he set out to cleanse the German people and the rest of the world of this degenerate art. One of the things he intended to do, which was very interesting to me, he was born in Linz, Austria, and he intended to create the best museum in the whole world in Linz, Austria. So Mark talked about the Monuments Men, and after the war, these paintings, these works that were found were given back to the countries. But before that, when they were being amassed by the Germans, the first culling of these works were set aside, the best, the old masters, the great works were set aside for Hitler to use in his museum in Linz. And the irony, of course, is that he was going to create the greatest museum in the world based on the works he had confiscated, mostly from the Jewish community. Needless to say, that museum didn't get built. What he did do was set up a commission, a commission to cleanse the culture of this, what he called degenerate art. And he had he didn't, but Joseph Goebbels, who was his director of Goebbels. I want to give you the title that Goebbels was given because it was an excellent title. Goebbels was made Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. And one of the things that the Minister of Enlightenment and Propaganda did was create an exhibition of this degenerate art that they believed should not be shown to anyone, except they wanted to educate the population on what degenerate art was. And so they did have an exhibition. This ran for about 2 years. It was shown in Austria and in Germany. And they divided the works that they had collected into categories. So there was a room full of works that denigrated women, another that denigrated religion. And then if that weren't clear to people, then they also had slogans on the walls that told people why they should be offended by this work. So one of the slogans was insolent mockery of the divine. So this, of course, was anti-religious, or deliberate sabotage to national defense. And you can imagine what this looked like. The catalog, and this is the cover, and I don't know what the cover represents. The cover also was very clear in explaining to people what the problem was. And the catalog in part said, in the case of most of the paintings and drawings, there is no telling what was in the sick brain of those who wielded the brush or the pencil. In this insanity, visitors to the exhibition usually just shake their heads and smile. But it is no laughing matter. We can only choke back our fury that so decent a people as the Germans could ever have been so foully abused. So if you weren't clear about why you should hate the degenerate art, the catalog told you exactly. This painting is by John Menziger, a 20th century French painter. It's called Un Canot, in the boat. It was exhibited in Prague, and it was also exhibited in the degenerate art exhibition. It disappeared. We don't know if it was destroyed, but the assumption is it was, because it hasn't been seen since, although these things do resurrect themselves from time to time. The degenerate art exhibition had about 5,000 works in it. After the exhibition closed, some of the works were sold usually through Swiss auction houses, and the money was used for the war effort. But at the end of the exhibition in 1939, the fire brigade in Berlin destroyed 4,000 works. They burned them. That had no monetary value for the Germans. Another painting that was declared a degenerate. This is Egon Schiele's painting of standing nude in black stockings. Egon Schiele was an Austrian painter. He did a lot of graphic nudes, and you can probably see why this might have been offensive to the Nazi organization. This work did survive the Holocaust. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I'm going to show you another Schiele work. This is called Portrait of Wally. And you may know this work because it had an infamous sojourn in the United States. It was seized by the Nazis. It had belonged to a private collection of a woman named Leah Bondi, who was an art dealer in Vienna. And after she fled Vienna, and after the war, she did get back her gallery collection and some of her private collection, but this work she did not get back. And as Mark said, the monument men distributed works after the war as best they could, and this work was distributed back to the Austrians and should have been sent back to her because, again, she got many of her works back. She didn't get this one back. It wound up at the Belvedere Museum, which is the National Museum of Austria. She made some attempts to get it back, was unsuccessful. The Belvedere sold it to, or exchanged it to, the Leopold Museum, also in Vienna. And at that point, Mrs. Bondi gave up because she didn't think she could fight Dr. Leopold, who was a very powerful person in the art community. Fast forward to the late 1990s, the Leopold Museum made a loan to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and the portrait of Wally was part of that exhibition. The Bondi heirs, Mrs. Bondi's heirs, she was dead by this time, the heirs sued the Leopold Museum in New York. The U.S. Attorney General went in and seized the portrait. Then the portrait spent 13 years in the vault at the Museum of Modern Art in New York while this court case wended its way. And just as the case was going to the jury, the Leopold Museum offered the family $19 million for the work. The family accepted, and the work is still at the Leopold Museum. This next painting, also by an Austrian artist, Gustav Klimt, and you probably know this. And if you haven't seen The Woman in Gold, I loved it. Art historians and art museum directors don't always like it, but I thought it was a great movie. The Woman in Gold is actually a portrait by Gustav Klimt. It's called The Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. She was an aristocratic Jewish woman, the wife of a Jewish industrialist. And this should have been on the list of the Nazis because Klimt made his fortune and his reputation primarily painting aristocratic Jewish women. But when this painting was seized, Adele Bloch-Bauer died fairly young. Her husband, when he left Vienna after her death to escape the Nazis, the work was confiscated and went to the Belvedere Museum where it hung. However, the Nazis wiped out any relationship to the Jewish community. And so the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer became The Woman in Gold. And that story is again told after Ferdinand Bloch-Bauer died. His will came forward, was publicized. He left everything to his nieces and nephews. They had no children. The Belvedere made no attempt to return the work to the family. And so when Ferdinand's will was read, and this is sometime later, one of the nieces, Maria Altman, lived in Southern California at the time, hired a lawyer, and there were about 7 heirs to the estate. And they went after the Belvedere Museum in the United States. They tried in Austria and they got no place, so they went after them in the United States. And did something that had not been done before, in that they sued for a work of art that had never been in the United States. It wasn't in the United States. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court did say, yes, indeed, they could sue the Belvedere Museum. At that point, after a little more negotiation, the Belvedere Museum returned the work to the heirs. The heirs sold it to the Neue Gallery in New York for $135 million. At that point, no work had ever been that expensive. Gustav Klimt was pretty well known, but that really put him on the map. If you haven't seen the painting, it was sold to the Neue Gallery on condition that it always be up, that it always be shown. And if you haven't seen it, it's stunning. It's an absolutely gorgeous painting. Oops, I skipped one. Something happened here. This. This is a work by Marc Chagall. He's one of my favorite painters. He's a French-Russian painter, Jewish, raised in a Jewish community village in what is now Russia, and was greatly influenced by the community in which he lived. So you see a lot of Jewish stories and legends in his work. And he was much appreciated by the Germans, until the Nazis came to power. And then they wrote a description of this that says, green, purple, and red Jews shooting out of earth, fiddling on violins, flying through the air, representing an assault on Western civilization. Now really, talk about hyperbole, huh? This is a painting of a celebration of the Jews being saved by a Prussian king, and it celebrates the festival of Purim. And while it isn't mother and child, it's in the same vein, isn't it? It's a religious ceremony. We're going to move now to the U.S. This painting is, you may have seen this, it's Chris O'Feely. He is a British painter, young. His parents are Nigerian, but his whole education, he was born in England, his whole education, he had a very good reputation as a painter. And in 1992, he visited Zimbabwe and came back with a lot of ideas about African art. This painting is called The Holy Virgin Mary. It opened in a collection, or in an exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and caught the attention of the then mayor of the city of New York, Mayor Giuliani, who called it sick. He sued the Brooklyn Museum of Art. He tried to withdraw a $7 million grant that they had and to evict them from the building they were living in. The museum fought back. This is a pretty unusual situation. The museum fought back, countersued on the basis of their First Amendment rights to show these works, and the museum won. So the exhibition continued. O'Feely's reputation really grew, and so did the attendance at the exhibition, needless to say. This next work is not a painting, it's a still from a video. This is David Wojnarowicz, an American who died in the early 90s of AIDS. He did a 7-minute video based on the death of his partner, who also died of AIDS. And part of this video was cut down to 7 minutes and shown at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. The National Portrait Gallery is part of the Smithsonian Institutions, and you probably know the Smithsonian Institutions has about 19 museums and study centers and all kinds of things around the world. And the National Portrait Gallery is a very staid place, but they did do an exhibition on homosexual art and artists, and this was part of the exhibition. The president of the Catholic League, who had not seen the exhibition, had not seen the work, called it hate speech and incited a couple of congressmen who then threatened the Smithsonian Institution with withdrawing their funds. The Smithsonian Institution, again, as I said, 19 institutions and research centers around the world, they get a lot of money from the federal government. And so to threaten your funding and to make the institution, the Smithsonian Institution, sort of the celebrated cause in the federal government, just didn't fly. So the secretary of the Smithsonian, who unfortunately was new to the job, had the work removed. And that was a big brouhaha as well, as you can well imagine. This next piece you've already seen from Mark. This is the temple at Palmyra, 2,000 years old. One of the things about ISIS, they are ferocious fighters. They are also extraordinarily good PR people. They released 5 photographs on the internet, all regarding this temple. The first ones show the militia carrying the explosives in, then it shows the explosives around the temple, and then finally it shows the explosion of the temple. When they took over Palmyra, they said they would go after only idolatrous works, and for them, idolatrous works are grave markers, statues, and symbols of paganism that ought to be destroyed. And I guess symbols of paganism are anything that represent or honor a god that you don't represent if you're ISIS. I have a lot of problems believing that the purification that they are endeavoring to visit upon the world is really religious inspired. And then this last piece I'm going to show you is called, it's from an exhibition called Sculptures We Do Not See. This was an exhibition that opened in Moscow about 5 weeks ago. It's an avant-garde exhibition, and during the Stalin-Khrushchev period, which is a period we didn't talk about, but the avant-garde was not shown in Russia. It didn't fit the social realism that the Russians were so interested in. So this retrospective are works that I don't know if they've been seen in Russia or not, but certainly Russia has changed a lot since the war, the Cold War days. There's an ultra-conservative Orthodox Christian group called God's Will. They stormed into the exhibition, destroyed the works, harassed the visitors and the people in the museum, declared, as the fact is that there's a criminal code that punishes mocking of religion in Russia, and that was passed by Putin right after the Pussy Riots, which you may remember about 10 years ago. They made it a crime to denigrate religion. I don't know that this denigrates religion, but God's Will thought it did. The important thing about this, or the interesting thing about this, is that this group has gone into other exhibitions. They do it with total impunity. The police are never called. There is no retribution. And one of the articles I read, which I think describes, unfortunately, what this is about, it said this article said, in a way, the state has subcontracted the role as guardian of morality to the ultra-conservative groups and organizations. And this happened, as I say, I read about it about 3 weeks ago, and it was then 2 weeks old. And when we see what's happening in Russia today, I think we're close to where Josh started us. And I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts. Shakespeare said, "What's past is prologue." And George Santayana said, "Those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it." And then there's a new book out, which it just came out. I haven't read it. I've only read the reviews. It's called Black Earth, The Holocaust as History and Warning. And I think we see some of those echoes of the things we've talked about in what's happening today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you both, Anita, and thank you, Mark, for fabulous discussions. Huge amount of food for thought there. I'd like to kick it off by asking a question of each of you, and then we'll go to Q&A. First, for you, Mark, what I inferred from your discussion is that art and power come together in 3 ways, or at least 3 ways. 1, you create art as an expression of your own power. Right? 2, you destroy art as an expression of your own power, and as an announcement that there's a new boss in town. And the 3rd way, which I was not expecting in your talk, but was really interesting, you save art as an expression of your own capabilities, as a rallying cry for other people to join side with you. And the example you gave was really fascinating. The communists in Spain, of all groups, the communists saving what appear to me to be very bourgeois kinds of arts in celebration of enormously wealthy people, right? As a way of rallying support to their side. I mean, I have a narrow question and a big question. The narrow question is, was there any heartache within the Spanish communists about this? Right? That they're saving expressions of the very power they deride as a way of rallying support. Did they have cold feet about that at any point? Right? And the other question is, are there other examples of that, of groups trying to gain power and gain new adherents by saving art rather than destroying art? And then for Anita, I was just wondering, and thank you for your presentation, it was marvelous. I'm just wondering, given your perch in Washington and given your perspective, I was wondering if you could give us a sense of what's the temperature in Congress these days with regard to art? I remember the culture wars. I remember when it was very intense in the 80s and thereabouts. People cut funding, and they thought this was abysmal, and it was a real bad period. So what's the mood on the Hill these days? Has Congress reached a durable sort of status quo with the art world, or are we in for more controversy later?
Thank you, Josh. For the communists in the Civil War and the use of art, I think that basically they understood that these were valuable assets. And I do think that there was an intellectual gathering of very major intellectuals that were very sensitive to art and the preservation of patrimony. Without a doubt, if the communists would have won the war, the Duke of Alva most likely would have never gotten back his works of art. So I think that they understood that as a way to just secure assets, during the war. But they did. It's just a lesser-known story, but it's a prelude to what happened in the Second World War. One more prelude. The Spanish Civil War was a prelude to many things that we would see. Just talk about a history repeating itself, just in a much larger magnitude later on. And this was also part of it, and it's remarkable that it went through all this journey. So I hope that answered that question. And in the broader term, it's really fascinating because I do think that we're seeing this kind of destruction of cultural patrimony, and there's institutions and organisms that are trying to react to that. And I think A&D is a good example of that. I think that UNESCO is a good example, so there's a sensibility to that. But I personally feel that there's much more that can be done. I think that it can be organized in a much more vigorous way. I would ask myself, what if, in Syria, for example, knowing that things would probably have gone in the direction they are going or have gone worse, what if there was those trucks that we saw coming from the Prado Museum, and they were already thinking, well, bombs may be falling here very soon. Let's take the art out of here and prevent this from happening. What if we had done the same thing with all the museums and in Syria and so forth? I love to see the blue helmets growing up in Europe, in Yugoslavia and the former Yugoslavia and that, and so close to your own countries, seeing how Libya and so forth, how they act to protect. But what if there are blue helmets also with culture, like monument men that go in and just talk to the governments and try to bring to safe havens some of these great cultural assets that belong not only to the countries, but for Spain, they should be thankful to Switzerland. For having brought the Prado to Geneva during the Spanish Civil War. In the same way that bombs fell in Lydia Palace in Madrid, they could have fallen in the Prado. So we're very fortunate that happened. So, I think that never Spain has thanked Switzerland for being a safe haven.
Just to follow on Mark's discussion about the communists, the Red Army, of course, went into Europe and did a lot to turn around that Second World War, but one of the things they did was take the art with them as booty of war, whereas the rest of the countries turned it back to the countries from which it originated. So the war booty is still in Russia, and the Hermitage, and I've not been there, but the Hermitage reportedly has some of the greatest art in the world, and that's the art that came out of, was saved by the Russians, but not returned by the Russians. Sorry,
if you go to the Hermitage, I was there last year, and I brought that issue. They say we also lost 26 million people,
yes. And that's part of it. That's what the war booty compensates for. In answer to your question, Josh, about the temperature in Washington, I always say, as a general rule, the federal government is not interested in the arts. But as you saw with the example that I used from the National Portrait Gallery, a couple of congressmen can easily be inflamed. And a couple of congressmen being inflamed can really push the media. And so it could happen overnight. There could be another exhibition that somebody doesn't like or takes offense. We're great in Washington creating straw men and balloons. We've got all kinds of them. Right now it happens to be Planned Parenthood. Next month it could be a museum exhibition. It could be whatever. As a general rule, the government is benign towards the arts. They do support the arts. There's quite a bit of money from the federal government that goes into the arts. Not huge amounts, but the museums that are supported are well supported.
Great, we have a couple of microphones going around, so if you raise a hand and we'll try to get people.
There seems to be a religious overlay on many of the incidents you talked about. The current focus is on ISIS, but if you go back to Moses destroying the golden calf, or go back to the time of Savonarola in Florence, the religious overlay and the destruction of art has a long history. Should I be optimistic about the future, or is this going to go on for a long time?
I'm pessimistic. But I'm also optimistic in the sense that I do think that, history has taught us that, and it's part of who we are. And it's so, like a former professor of history here recently told me that, Mark, what is the right way to say it, that the human being it's so complex. This is an 86-year-old man with a lot to say. I'm still amazed about the complexity of human beings. And I think this is part of that. I mean, how can you understand blowing up one thing and then saying the same thing and then and living together and understanding it the following day? It's part of that complexity. I personally think also that when it comes to reaction and to involvement, politics, economics, sociological issues, and so forth, they're so much more up there than culture. And sometimes I think that I'm the kind of person that will bring culture more up there when it comes to issues, both nationally and internationally.
Let's see. I think I must have done something. I'm actually equally pessimistic. When you look at what happened in the Holocaust and you look at what is happening today in Syria, and not just Syria, the whole Middle East. And I was telling Mark and Josh earlier, I happened to be in Vienna 3 weeks ago, and taking trains from Vienna to Salzburg and Salzburg to Zurich, along with an awful lot of refugees. And these were not the refugees who had walked hundreds of miles. These were the refugees who could afford to buy train tickets. The governments of these countries are just beside themselves. And the destruction and the movement of people we haven't seen since the Second World War. So I am not optimistic, unfortunately.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead, and then we'll take a few minutes. Okay. So I'm sorry, I have two totally unrelated questions. The first is for Mark. I was really struck by the two primary examples that you chose when talking about the House of Alba, one being a portrait and the other being a statue. And those two works of art have very different kind of contexts of display. Not many people would have seen the portrait who had been hung in a house, and its primary audience for projecting power would have been aristocratic guests, diplomats, etc. It's very much speaking to a particular and quite small audience, in contrast to a large enemy-stomping statue in a public square. And this raises the question about ISIS and its propaganda. When they're projecting power, who are they projecting power to? Can we kind of drill down and see different audiences for the destruction of antiquities, both inside of the regions that they're claiming to rule and also in the onlooking world? And the second, unfortunately unrelated question is for Anita, and it, I guess you spoke mostly about the destruction or censorship or erasure of art. One topic raised in the CNN video was the sale of art on the black market. And I was wondering whether you thought that this economically motivated destruction of art in context is being performed by the same people and for the same reasons. Is ISIS, in fact, getting funding through the sale of art on the black market? Is there really all that much money in it to manage a state? Or is this something where it's private actors taking advantage of power vacuums, that sort of thing? I speak from pretty serious naivete. Is the black market really enough for like a nation to sorry for the randomness and the duality?
Well, when it comes to to what the messaging, when you put enough TNT or dynamite to blow up a whole building, and as Anita was pointing out, they're really good. I also think so with PR. They do know exactly how to send a message. And if the message, and this is my personal opinion, if the message is just about religion and how they believe religion interacts with art and the facing of figures and so forth, they can do it differently. I think that for me the message is that it's a way of understanding civilization, and they're going after values that they know Western world cherish a lot. And the same way, I suppose, that a bullet hurts. I never had a wound by a bullet, but I've had a few scars in my life. And I think that this hurts. To anybody that has any sensitivity and has been brought in the Western Hemisphere, you cannot react when you see that happening. The same way that it is the power of art when you think about it. When you saw that little child coming to the shores of Turkey that was 3 years old, did you think the same thing about immigration? Or all the things that Anita was talking? It became real. That the kind of the power of the image, it's huge. And that kind of power is the same power that the Duke of Alva wanted to make present when he was in power in Andrew. And the same kind of very strong messaging of, we're here in a mission, is what I think we're seeing with ISIS.
To answer the question about whether or not the antiquities can support a market, or whether the market can support the destruction and the militia, I think it's doubtful, but I think the press has really run with this story. Much of what's being dug up are small, inexpensive pieces that people are really hurting in these communities because they're in war-torn countries. Their livelihood has been destroyed, and so many of them are digging some of those holes that Mark showed you in an earlier piece, that they're digging for whatever they can find and whatever they can sell. Whether or not ISIS is, and there are stories that ISIS is funding some digs and that these big pieces are coming out. The museums in the United States have not seen any of this, nor have the auction houses. So it's hard to tell. Some might be coming out. They might be going to oil sheiks in the Gulf states. They might be going to private collectors who don't care about the source. But I don't think it's that much, frankly. It hasn't been substantiated, but there have been a lot of stories in the press.
We had a question.
This kind of follows up on what I wanted to say. I think we are seeing a lot of questions of our values here in the United States. And I wanted to expressly recommend a movie that Paul Krugman has talked about in his column in the New York Times, I think it was last week. And it is kind of a warning for just this kind of reaction that we're seeing maybe currently today among our political arguments, because they are really bleeding over into cultural kinds of thoughts and speaking too. So anyway, I just wanted to recommend that Holcomb is called "In a We Will, See No We Will," whatever the rest of that is. So anyway, that just all that comes to mind when you talk about disruption of culture.
Thank you very much.
This is not directly related to ISIS, but it does pertain to the intersection between art and politics. And I wonder if any of you three are aware of what's happening in the World Intellectual Property Organization. So let me read you a short paragraph. Negotiations are currently underway in the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge, and Folklore towards the development of international legal instrument or instruments for the effective protection of traditional cultural expressions and traditional knowledge, and to address the intellectual property aspects of access to and benefit sharing genetic resources. Now, this relates to the whole idea that, say, tribal societies have their own cultural patrimony, and they haven't had any needs for protecting it either too. So there's an international organization trying to grapple with the idea of providing some form of intellectual property protection for these societies. Now, this is a very complicated issue, because I can tell you that scholars in fields like anthropology and art history and so forth need to be concerned about what kinds of restrictions this would place on their own use and publication of materials from these societies when they go into the field to do research. So it's a really important matter for people in the academic community to monitor. I don't think many people are aware of this happening. You can find out a lot more about it by simply Googling WIPO and traditional knowledge together.
Down here, 7.
Well, thank you both for very interesting lectures and some interesting examples. I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying, Anita, about the art market not supporting and not being a financial drive for ISIS, since the antiquities market is the 4th largest illegal trade in the world in terms of finances. And also we have started seeing some ISIS-looted pieces at galleries in Switzerland, as well as a lot of galleries in Dubai. So I was just wanting to follow up, since you're obviously in DC and you're a little closer on the ground there, in terms of, to clarify your comments. So you were saying that we haven't seen any pieces in galleries in America, and that's why you were saying that ISIS isn't getting financial gain from this, or just to clarify?
I was speaking of the U.S. museums and the U.S. Galleries, but I think the figure you cite, the 4th largest source of income, is a figure that came through a speech that Senator Kerry gave, and it was done by a researcher who didn't intend for it to be taken in the context it was taken. And so there's been a lot of talk about, in the press, about that 4th largest resource. And I think this researcher, who is at the University of Chicago, I think, has pretty much disavowed the number that he put. He actually put a number on it. And so I think we have to be very mindful when we talk about some of the things that are funding ISIS. And I don't think the antiquities are funding ISIS, is the bottom line. It isn't to say that they aren't selling pieces, and certainly I'm sure they are, but I don't think it's funding what they're doing by and large.
My question is about the influence of ISIS around the rest of the world. So Dr. Roglán, feel free to chime in on this as well. My question is, we've seen influence like with Charlie Hebdo and ISIS-inspired attacks, not only here in America, but France, Australia, with the hostage situation last year. Do you see, or is there any risk of of similar attacks like we saw in the museum in Palmyra in other countries outside of the Middle East? And if there is a risk for that, what is the extent of it?
Well, it's a great question. Will copycats in other countries attack art the way that ISIS has attacked art in Syria? I mean, the cheesy answer is they might. Right? Copycats are prone to do all sorts of nutty things. They'll have a much more difficult time succeeding for the obvious reason that museums and cultural centers outside of Syria and Iraq are not under ISIS control. I mean, ISIS could take its time to plant explosives and chop up antiquities at its leisure. Doing so at a museum elsewhere is much more difficult, honestly. That said, I mean, there is always that danger. Somebody goes to a museum with a knife and carves up a painting. These things can happen, and they might happen. I think the broader question for U.S. foreign policy, for how we understand ISIS, is then how do you want to grapple with this group writ large? Do you want to make this an apocalyptic fight over ideologies in conflict? Right? Which is sort of what we're doing. If you listen to the president's speech at the UN, if you listen to American rhetoric throughout, we're treating this as a generational struggle requiring a global effort against a cult. It might be where that's the wrong approach, because people hear that kind of rhetoric and they might want to join the cult. They might want to say, hey, these guys aren't small players. Look at the response they're getting from the whole world. It might be where our well-meaning language about winning the war of ideas and destroying the terrible ideology has the unanticipated consequence of actually giving them prestige they do not deserve, winning them adherence that they ought not have. So there is this minor question about whether or not this kind of behavior will spread. If it does, it's terrible. There is the general question of how we should treat our response to the group. And since you asked me to speak, I have the mic. One more plug for the Tower Center. On November 5th, we're having another big event on ISIS, featuring Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Joby Warren, as well as one of the best young scholars on how governments fight terrorist organizations. So if you're not on our email list, you should be, and we'll see you again.
In the back, there were two people waiting in the back.
Now, just you. A number of the conversations that y'all brought up, that you've introduced, are between art and power, and specifically religious art in a lot of circumstances. Yet I noticed that we have an art historian, political science, art and politics, and no theology professor or no religious studies professor. What kind of conversations need to be happening with religion, with the study of religion, with the study of faiths, with theologians, and art historians, and politicians, and political science? I mean, we're in the South, we're in part of the Bible Belt. I think faith drives a lot of people. What kind of conversations need to happen with that voice at the table?
Are you suggesting another event? No, I think it's a great event. It's a great question. And one of the things that I was struck by in Mark's comments and Anita's comments was there is this tension. Are people like ISIS, are they really doing this for religious reasons? If you ask them, they'll say yes. They make the most of it. But is this really about religion, or is this just an expression of power? And the thought experiment that I like to play is, imagine these people had no religion at all. Would their behavior be any different? We have plenty of cases of civil war and of conflict in which religion clearly wasn't driving the participants, and yet you see grisly violence and atrocities and terrible sort of expressions of power against one another. So it's really hard to disentangle that. That said, if somebody is claiming to be operating on the basis of religion, and they're doing something, you can't ignore that. Right? So if I was to do another Tower Center Meadows Museum event, perhaps with the Perkins School, just tagging along, we would raise that issue, and maybe put it to serious theologians or students of religion. When people say they're acting on behalf of God's will, do they mean what they say?
And I would add also the Cox Business School. I mean, the whole issue of business. It's really interesting as well.
I guess my question would be, you sort of touched on it in your answer, what is the end game? Why do this that infuriates the entire world in the manner they're doing it? And what is the ultimate goal in doing that? I mean, this is something I don't understand yet.
The ISIS goal, according to the PR that they put out, is to purify the civilization in order to create a state of pure ISIS theology, or if you call it theology. That's the PR. It's to purify. They use the word. The Nazis use the word to cleanse, and the ISIS is using the word to purify, and I think it all has to do with power.
But you could do that without the PR and all the other part. It's announcing to the world they're doing that, but does that benefit you in the long run? Would it be wiser just to have this stuff disappear than put it on CNN every night, is my question. Because all it does is make other people really angry with you. That's all.
You don't seem to mind.
Maybe not.
Time for a couple more questions. Or down in front.
Yes. This last summer, we visited a sculpture in Denmark, but doing a major commission. And his critique is in general of fundamentalism. And whether it's religious or power, it hit me as a key to a lot of what's going on. And I just wondered if you're familiar with this. I think it's supposed to be shown in New York, but it's a sculpture critiquing fundamentalism. And do you think that is an issue that is prevalent in all these cases?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that.
Well, what about the issue of fundamentalism as the guiding force behind what these people say they're doing, whether it's religious or political? Has he got something in his mind with such a critique?
I think we're all against what's going on. I mean, but it's happening. I mean, and the answer. I mean, the question. What I think is like, what can we do to mitigate this pain? No, and after thinking it quite a bit this summer, I came more like prevention. So it's like trying to not get sick. No, you try to prevent those things from happening. And I don't know if that will ever happen or not, but it's in a completely different matter. I was thinking also now when you were talking about sculptures and removing sculptures. It's happening in Spain too, right now. Like for example, like 2 or 3 years ago, all Franco sculptures in the country were removed. Then there's the tomb of Franco just in the outskirts of Madrid, in Valle de los Caídos, the Valley of the Fallen, which is a cross that is gigantic. You cannot drive without seeing it. And he's buried there. And it was constructed by prisoners from the other side, which also are buried there. And there's a monastery there. And some people want to blow it up. I mean, just get rid of it. And the question is like, if that was to happen, do you really erase history? No. I was moved, when I went to St. Petersburg like a few months, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, our guide, you go to drive in St. Petersburg and you still see a lot of the the things that happened during the Second World War, during the siege of Leningrad. But also you see a lot of communist symbols. You see sculptures of Lenin, and you see like the symbol of the communists and buildings and so forth. And I was like, didn't they just remove this? And the guy said like, no, it's part of our history. I mean, this is, whether you like it or not, this has happened in Russia for 100 years. And it's part of who you are. So there's something about that common, no? It's part of our history. I mean, and regardless, unfortunately, and that's that. I don't think that at the end you really gain anything by the destruction of all of this.
Goodness. A bunch of hands up, and we've got 1 minute on the clock. I mean, you've been working for us. You get the last one.
Thank you, and thank you both for your presentations. We've discussed to some extent the need for action, be that reactionary or preventative, and also the kind of U.S. government in particular, but other governments around the world's unwillingness to get involved with art and the art market and the destruction that we're currently seeing. And I was wondering what both the art historian's perspective and the museum director's perspective would be on the current kind of small-scale, crowd-funded things going on in the Middle East. Things like Sci-Art, like Project Mosul. The most recent one I've seen is called Palmyra Photogrammetry, which is just a guy with a degree in computer science asking for Kickstarter money and vacation pictures of Palmyra to put together like GPS-tagged 3D maps, and whether that's something that kind of museums are getting behind and that art historians could see as useful, even though it's not the actual physical artifacts.
Museums is all about the artifacts. I mean, what we have here are, we devote our lives, our souls, and everything we have inside to the object. I mean, so I would say that the object is, I mean, this is, the real thing is what makes museum a museum. I mean, these are not just copies of reproductions, these are the originals. And that's what I think that we're all about. I mean, that those initiatives are great. I think they're super positive. I mean, I think that that's really great that it's being done, but not connected so much with museums.
And I would agree with Mark. I think they're very creative. They're, in some instances, particularly where the art has been destroyed and there are records, those records become viral and they are extremely important, and they will be to historians and to researchers. But they are probably going to be part of, well, I shouldn't say that, because there was an exhibition at the university, I think the University of Chicago put it together, and I saw it at the Freer Gallery in Washington, D.C., where they had a photograph that moved around a cave and showed where these heads would have been.
We had it here.
You had it here?
Yeah.
Ah.
It was on the past.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that photography did play an important role in recreating what no longer exists.
Yeah.
So.
Wasn't it freer too? And then it came to the head. Yeah, it was here, and it was great because they would reproduce a cavern, and they knew the pieces that were still missing, so it was like a puzzle that was still trying to be solved. And I think that it's absolutely great that those initiatives are taking place. I can tell you as an art historian, one of if you are working in Spain or in Spanish art, one place you have to still go today is to this photographic archive in Barcelona called the Amayer Institute. And the Amayer Institute is it's very important for any art historian because this family that was a chocolate maker family, decided to fund this huge project in the early 1930s, which was to document every single work of art in Spain, document every single church, document every single altarpiece, document every single sculpture, every single crossroad, anything that was artistic, to document in the entire territory of Spain. And for years, there were all these photographers just scouting all over Spain and taking photographs of all this art. Well, then the Civil War came. And a lot of the churches were destroyed, a lot of the art just happened not to be there. And the only resource that we still have to see some of these objects and know that they existed is this archive. So anybody that's doing research on Spanish art needs to go there because there's a lot of references of art that you know it existed, but you don't have any photographic image unless we have that. And we have 20,000 photographs here at the Meadows from that archive because we became a depository for that a number of years ago. So it's a great tool. So that's a good example of this kind of initiatives happening 8 years ago.
Well, I think we're about out of time, unfortunately. This is something of an experimental program, but I think you'll agree it was an absolutely fascinating discussion. And I learned a great deal from both of our speakers. So please join me in thanking Roglán.